So let's have a look at strategic levers as our first section topic now. As Nicole said, we're going to keep flashing this graphic up as a way of sort of going through the sustainable procurement steps. But just at the beginning, as we talk about strategic levers and how to prioritize, we're just there at the process. I am a bit of a supply chain nerd and love to look at why we say things as well. And I think the word levers gets used a lot. In the context of sustainable procurement, it's important to understand that any large machine built to generate a particular outcome has levers, which essentially are switches that turn off parts, sections of that big machine. And so if you think about the council overall, which provides a really detailed function and service to local residents and businesses alike, different levers will help activate some of those processes. So levers that we're going to refer to in this section are specific initiatives, specific things that you can do to help activate and deactivate processes and parts of councils. But of course, there are lots and lots of them. And the question always comes up, well, why not pull all the levers? If we want more sustainable procurement, just pull all the levers as fast as we can. The issue is usually resources. Council might not have the resources, the fuel, the staff to keep everything running at full pace all the time. So working out which levers to pull, which levers will have the best or the most impact with the fewest resources is really important. And so when we talk about strategic levers, it's working out which are most relevant to the business function or the service or the priorities, or in terms of COVID, the situation and the goals right now. And knowing which strategic levers to pull can take time, can take a little while to figure out, but it's important to consider, because if you're only going to pull one or two, you need to make sure that they're the right ones, that are the most strategic levers.
So when we think about this in terms of councils, we can think about the local government governance framework. Now, every council has this in place already, and you might call it a governance framework, or there might be another name for it. But if you think about within your council, you've already got tools and processes and policies that help you achieve those overarching council outcomes. So as Robin's talked about, it's this idea of levers that can help you achieve that council objective, purpose, or value. So if we think about that within your council, we just go back to that governance framework that we know every council has, those different tools and processes. Pop into the chat now. So what you think some of those governance tools or processes might be that are available to guide your council decision making.
And again, I've set the timer for 1 minute. So 1 minute brainstorm, please put the details into the chat box.
Pop it into the chat. And it's not as difficult as you think, because we use these every single day. So when you go to make a decision within council, there'll be certain levers or processes or tools that you use. So but
Nicole, you're giving the answers away. This is meant to be difficult as well.
I'm a psycho. I feel bad for the hard questions, but they're coming. Yeah. Local environmental plans, environmental strategies, procurement policies, council strategic plans. Yes, exactly. Policies, procedures, intranet. Absolutely, Maria. So now we're getting into those nitty-gritty tools that we use every day. Yep, executive meetings, procedures, relationships. That's a great one. Ops and delivery plan.
Great to see all of those come through.
Excellent.
Good examples.
We're getting in the swing. It wasn't as hard as I thought. Targets. Yes, that's the one I wanted to see. Risk assessment and management. Absolutely. Every council has that, and it's a great tool for procurement. Market options. Yep. Procurement objectives. Excellent. All right. So everything that's gone into the chat is correct. These are all different levers that we can use. These strategic levers that we have here, these are 5 foundational the strategic levers that we would say that every council has. We go into a bit more detail in the recommendations report around these, but the idea here is that by having these 5 in place, you've got that foundational framework ready to go. And you've all got, I think, probably the first 4. So definitely you've got a strategic plan, you'll have your risk management framework, a sustainability policy. So the sustainability policy is now taking those organisational goals and targets within the strategic plan and reframing it for a sustainability policy as well as procurement policy. So, taking that and redefining it as to what it means for procurement. The supplier code of conduct, not all councils had a supplier code, but this is something to consider as we go down the path of sustainable procurement, because this is where we can communicate clearly to community and suppliers, to the market, on what those sustainability objectives are. So you can kind of imagine the goals, the high-level goals and targets up here on the left, and that they start to trickle down throughout all of the levers as we go. And we've got a couple of examples coming up for these. So,
and just to stress, as Nicole was just going through, examples of all of those levers, part of the reason that they're so important is, yes, they reflect the commitment of councils, and I know you'll all have different commitments at different levels and different aspects of what we're talking about, but they also help employees, they help your colleagues understand, firstly, what's important to councils, what's important to local ratepayers, but what's a priority. We are going to prioritize carbon or waste or circular economy or social impact. And so they help provide the foundation and the framework. They help guide the sustainable procurement activities that are going to come. And they'll sort of self-regulate the procurement system back towards more sustainable outcomes. And as Justin had put in the chat earlier, not just a little less bad, but actually positive impact as we go. And it also, one of the really important things, it makes sure that your internal stakeholders, your colleagues and external ones, whether suppliers or ratepayers, are aligned around those priorities. And that in turn is critical to organizational culture. You're not setting up a push me, pull you beast, which is heading in different directions at the same time. You're actually sure about what your priorities and your direction looks like around those. 2 good examples, both of which I know well. Croydon, southeast London, just near where I grew up, they established a social value framework, and it's a fascinating piece of work. It is a guide to what matters to Croydon, and it helps suppliers, so it helps all of their local networks and larger organizations, as well as employees, understand its values, understand what is important to Croydon Council, but also to local residents and local businesses. And it helps keep that aligned. And then over in Calgary, if we look at the Canadian example, they have embedded their supplier code of conduct, not just in request for tender, but there are clauses that specifically relate to supplier codes. It is a condition of doing business with the city. It sends a really clear signal to suppliers that the ethical and labour standards that they've established are to be taken seriously. So down to that clause, it makes it really clear what they find important.
And those examples will be in the resources section as well. So now another little activity for you to type into the chat box. I know that there will be plenty of these, so we just want to get it off our chests up front in the training. What are the major barriers that you're facing in achieving more sustainable procurement? We know that it's all well and good we're talking about these strategic levers that are going to help you in sustainable procurement, but we know that with implementing or embedding sustainability within those, that comes with barriers. So just want you to share what some of those barriers might be that you're currently facing. Fine, from the businesses, yeah, and from different departments, absolutely. Embedding across teams, because we know there's so many teams within councils. Yeah, they're coming through thick and fast.
And that's a really important, I mean, I look at that comment about existing contracts. It's an important point to make, that these are not overnight changes. In a lot of cases, there will be existing contracts, sometimes longer term, 5 or 10 or up to 10-year contracts that will need to run through before you can move to more sustainable procurement practices.
Right, that's that 1 minute, but I think that we got plenty in there. So let's have a quick look, see if we got them all. Pay barrier bingo. So decentralized procurement, that was mentioned, that yes, it's hard to implement these things such as guidelines when everybody's doing procurement, because we've got limited oversight over the process and that decision making. Lack of resources, absolutely. Lack of time, and also this idea, I saw Maria add that sustainable procurement can cost more, and so budget is also, so lack of time and money. Lack of expertise, there are a couple of comments in there around just not knowing what's out there, not having that expertise in-house, and as well in being able to have that expertise roll out to all departments at all times. We had the first comment in there, which is about that supply base, so suppliers can't meet expectations. Also had in here just risk aversion through council procurement practices, so that idea that we're not quite comfortable trying something new, or let somebody do it first. We'll reduce that risk by just avoiding it. And also thinking administratively, so this idea that procurement is about purchasing, so it's just about going out and making that purchase rather than thinking strategically and having that concept of value for money and what that means. So absolutely want to acknowledge that yes, all of these do exist, and so part of this training will be hopefully trying to come up with solutions for some of these. We know that they're out there. We could spend the rest of the 4 hours, talking about all of the barriers, but we want to focus on the solutions to these. And I think, as Robin said straight away as well, remind yourself that this is long game. This isn't sustainable procurement that's going to solve all of the world's problems overnight. And this is why we've got an emphasis on prioritising, starting small, and just incremental change.
So we're going to do another just 1 minute, quick 1 minute brainstorm, bearing in mind those barriers which we acknowledge and the length of time. What I'd like to hear is, what are some of the ways that you could embed council sustainability objectives into your existing processes? You will already have lots of existing processes around everything from footpaths to water bubblers, but what are some of the ways you could embed more sustainability objectives into existing processes? Again, 1 minute brainstorm. Please type some answers in the chat. And please do try to think out of the box. Think about something a little bit different, or pushing the envelope a little bit further. There's some great answers coming through already. That forward planning element, again, coming back to the time aspect, is really important. You can't always, plan a long way in advance, but when you can, the longer you can, you send really clear signals, and we'll be touching on that with supplier engagement in a little while. Mandating sustainability, always a good one to see. Trickier to do, but always good to see. And yes, updating procurement procedures and policies. And yes, Annie, good to see. Starting with sustainability objectives. Thank you for putting that one in there as well. Thank you. I think there's lots of different ways. Again, no one right. I think some of this is about engagement and teamwork. Some of this is about that longer term thinking that Nicole just mentioned. Robin, some of the ways that we can look. I'm just going to go through these bullet points really quickly, but some of the ways is to link back to sustainability strategies, or that vision, or the priorities in all procurement documentation. Some of the route is using the same wording. So once wording has been agreed about a sustainability vision or priority or a goal, then again, referencing that wording back, integrating objectives into existing policy where it exists, or into business case templates that came up a couple of times, or into the budget processes as well. I think something we saw a couple of times is about communicating commitments and targets during employee induction so that it's there from the very beginning, and using those sustainability objectives again to repeat back. So if a council has declared a climate emergency, that then needs to be reinforced as a priority in subsequent procurement. Did I hear a question coming through? Was there someone?
Yeah, Robin, it was David Eckstein. Just, I know that this issue is quite dear to your heart, but I'm thinking, one way to move people quite substantially along the line in terms of colleagues for whom this isn't front and center yet, is to, possibly to develop mini case studies that show just how significant impacts of current decisions are. And I'm going to stretch that to say, the modern slavery thing, we probably are fairly ignorant about some of the things we buy and the fact that upchain, we really might not like what we're involved in. Have you any thoughts about that?
I think there's sort of two aspects there. First is case studies, and case studies both internally and externally are excellent. They sometimes get a bit of a sigh of exhaustion from people because they do take some resources to develop, but where you have and when you can even just do like a 1 paragraph or 2 paragraph with some key figures, even if they're back of envelope figures, they're really important to communicate internally the success and then to start communicate externally. We will come back to the issue of human rights and modern slavery, but it's one very dear to my heart. I think there's an awful lot of supply chains, not just in councils, but private sector as well, or broader government, which are finding quite how tainted things are or quite how bad the human rights records are. But there aren't necessarily the alternatives straight away. And so, as Nicole said, often these are longer term gain that we need to communicate to suppliers what is and isn't acceptable. And a bit like performance management, say, we will be working with you up until this date, and after that, we will be looking for other suppliers. So it is a medium to long term performance management issue if you can't immediately see a change or insist on a change within current contracts or procurement activities.
Thank you.
But we will circle back to this because it is a very relevant. I mean, the issue of solar panels, the Uyghur forced labor in global solar panel manufacture, is one of those rising issues that we need to look at. And it's just one of, I suspect, thousands of similar issues that we're going to see. Next slide. There we go.
Right. So just to summarize and come back to these, and we'll try to come back to these throughout the training, but these strategic levers, these are things that are already in place for you. A lot of the things that have gone into the chat, these things already exist. It's just about how we integrate sustainability. Yes, a long game, and yes, there's a lot of this change management to come. But if you can make it part of what people already do, that's a big step. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. It's just let's use the tools that are at hand and bring in sustainability. So I think if we can lean on these first four, which we know that all of the councils have, and then perhaps one for the Sustainable Procurement Action Plan could be developing that supplier code of conduct. So we've seen a couple of great examples there. Definitely encourage you to look at the City of Calgary and also Croydon's social value policy and framework. I downloaded that myself because that framework is fantastic. We've also got a couple of great policies from SSROC as well. So we've got Inner Wests, which is available online, and through in their Sydney Waters Supplier Code of Conduct, which is another great Australian example.
And we'll be, of course, circulating the slide pack afterwards, so you'll have all of these live links to go back to in context.